Chased down a deserted road surrounded by ruthless bikers, she sees death approaching, until a silver wolf emerges from the shadows, changing her fate in an unimaginable way. The soft hum of the engine echoed through the deserted road as Emily Thompson guided her car through the dense vegetation of Green Mountain. The sky was painted with the last colors of dusk, creating a spectacle of orange hues that danced between the tops of century-old trees. It had been exactly 5 years since she left that small town lost on the map, swearing never to return. Fate, however, had other plans. The winding curves of the road serpentined between the lush vegetation, each mile traveled, bringing back memories she had tried to bury deep in her mind. Success in New York, a promising career as an architect, everything seemed so distant now. The call from Mrs. Johnson, her grandmother's neighbor, had changed everything. "Your grandmother needs you, Emily. She's not well." The uneven asphalt made the car sway gently, while the last rays of sun cast elongated shadows across the road. It was then that the first headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. At first, she wasn't worried, but soon realized that the motorcycles were approaching at an alarming speed. 4 hooded bikers surrounded her, blocking her passage. Emily's heart raced. She tried to increase her speed, but the treacherous curves gave her no advantage. The leader of the group pulled up alongside her, his dark leather jacket fluttering in the wind. The metallic sound of an object hitting against the car window made her stomach churn. That's when it happened. A deep, guttural howl cut through the air, echoing through the forest like thunder. A silver shadow emerged from the trees in an impossible leap, its majestic form silhouetted against the twilight sky. The wolf, larger than any animal Emily had ever seen, attacked one of the bikers with supernatural strength, tearing him from his motorcycle. Chaos instantly ensued. The other bikers retreated in panic, their motorcycles skidding on the asphalt before disappearing around the next bend. Emily kept her hands firmly on the steering wheel, her body trembling uncontrollably. The wolf turned, slowly in her direction, its golden eyes meeting hers through the car window. There was something in that gaze, an ancient and deep intelligence that made her whole body shiver. When she finally arrived at Mrs. Wilson's house, her hands were still shaking. The old wooden house remained exactly as in her memories, surrounded by the herb garden that her grandmother had cultivated for decades. The familiar aroma of rosemary and mint hung in the air, mixing with the damp smell of the forest. To her surprise, the door was already open, and her grandmother was waiting for her on the porch, as if she knew precisely the moment of her arrival. Mrs. Wilson didn't seem ill as the neighbor had suggested. On the contrary, she was upright and proud as always, her white hair tied in a firm bun, her dark eyes shining with a disturbing intensity. "He found you," were her first words, her voice carrying a weight that Emily couldn't comprehend. "The guardian? It's time for you to know the truth, my granddaughter." Her grandmother's words only increased her confusion and discomfort. Mrs. Wilson spoke of things that didn't make sense, about ancient guardians, about a deep connection with the forest, about a destiny that Emily could no longer avoid. "Your coming was inevitable," she repeated, while preparing an herbal tea in her old iron kettle. Night fell over Green Mountain like a heavy mantle. Lying in her old bed, Emily couldn't sleep. The wolf's howl still echoed in her mind, mixing with her grandmother's enigmatic words. Through the crack in the curtain, she watched the shadows, dancing among the trees, moving in ways that didn't seem natural. Something was changing in Green Mountain, she could feel it, and somehow inexplicably, she knew she was at the center of it all. The wolf, the mysterious bikers, her grandmother's words. Everything seemed part of a puzzle she still couldn't put together, but one thing was certain: her life would never be the same after that night. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. Morning arrived, bringing a dense fog that covered Mrs. Wilson's garden like a ghostly veil. Emily woke to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft sound of her grandmother tending to the herbs in the garden. As she descended the creaky stairs of the old house, she found the breakfast table set with care: homemade bread, wild blackberry jam, and cornbread, exactly as in her childhood. But the apparent normality of the scene was broken by the arrival of an elegant black car that parked in front of the house. From it descended a tall man, wearing an impeccable grey suit, accompanied by two serious-looking assistants. Through the kitchen window, Emily observed as they began to approach the local residence, asking questions and taking notes on modern tablets that completely contrasted with the rustic environment of the town. "It's them," murmured Mrs. Wilson, appearing silently behind Emily. "The New Era Corporation. They've been here for weeks asking questions about the ancient legends of Green Mountain, about the wolf." Her voice carried a mixture of concern and contempt that Emily had never noticed before. It was then that her grandmother decided to reveal the truth she had kept for so long. She led Emily to her room at the back of the house, an environment full of dried plants hanging from the ceiling and shelves filled with old books. From a locked drawer, she withdrew a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed by time. "Our family isn't common, Emily," Mrs. Wilson began, her fingers caressing the diary's pages with reverence. "For centuries, our ancestors have been the guardians of this land. Not just of the forest, you see, but of something much older and more powerful that rests beneath it." The pages of the diary revealed meticulous drawings of strange symbols, maps of caves, and notes in a language that Emily didn't recognize. Among them were illustrations of a majestic wolf, identical to the one she had encountered on the road. "The guardian you saw isn't a simple animal," her grandmother continued. "He is a manifestation of nature's force itself, a protector that appears whenever the forest is in danger. And now he has chosen you, Emily." The revelation fell upon her like an impossible weight to carry. She remembered the wolf's golden eyes, the inexplicable connection she felt at that moment on the road. "But why me? Why now?" "Because they are close to finding what they're looking for," Mrs. Wilson answered, her voice trembling slightly. "In the depths of Green Mountain, there is a sacred cave. Inside it, our ancestors hid something of immense power, something that the New Era Corporation has been seeking for decades." At that moment, a commotion coming from the street caught the attention of both. The bikers from the previous night had returned, this time accompanied by men in tactical gear carrying exploration equipment. They were heading for the trail that led to the heart of the forest. "They've found the entrance to the cave," whispered Mrs. Wilson, her face paling. "Emily, you need to accept who you are. The power that runs in your veins is the only thing that can stop them." Before she could respond, Emily felt a strange vibration in the air. The plants in her grandmother's room began to move, even without wind. Outside, the birds suddenly fell silent, and a sensation of static electricity made the hair on her arms stand on end. "The forest is reacting to their presence," explained Mrs. Wilson, moving quickly to an old shelf. From it, she retrieved a small silver medallion, decorated with the same symbols that Emily had seen in the diary. "This amulet belonged to your great-grandmother. It will help you awaken your powers." As she held the medallion, Emily felt a strange warmth emanating from it. Her hands tingled, and for a moment, she had the impression that she could hear ancient voices whispering in her ears, calling her to the depths of the forest. Their familiar howl echoed in the distance, more urgent this time. The guardian was calling, and for the first time in her life, Emily was beginning to understand her true destiny. The battle for the protection of Green Mountain was just beginning, and she, willing or not, was at the center of this ancient war. The silver medallion pulsed gently against Emily's chest as she followed her grandmother through the back garden. The air had changed, now carrying a different aroma, denser, as if the atmosphere itself responded to the presence of the invaders in the forest. Mrs. Wilson walked with determination, her experienced hands pushing aside branches and foliage with a familiarity that only years could provide. "Each woman in our family possesses a specific gift," the old lady explained, her voice blending with the whisper of the leaves. "Your great-grandmother could talk to the trees. Your great-aunt Sarah could control the winds. Well, herbs and plants have always been my allies." She stopped in front of a particularly lush flower bed where vibrant colored flowers grew in patterns that seemed to form ancient symbols. Emily observed everything with a mixture of fascination and incredulity. Her grandmother's words seemed to come from a fairy tale, but after the events of the previous night, her mind was more open to the impossible. "And what would my gift be?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "That, my dear, only you can discover," Mrs. Wilson replied, her eyes shining with ancient wisdom. "But first I need to show you something." They continued walking until they reached a small clearing hidden among the oldest trees in the yard. In the center, partially covered by moss and vines, was a circle of stones with inscriptions similar to those in the diary. Mrs. Wilson carefully began to remove the vegetation, revealing symbols that glowed faintly under the sunlight filtered through the treetops. "This is one of the ancient portals," she explained. "There are several of them scattered throughout Green Mountain, connecting power points of the forest. Our ancestors built them to protect what is hidden in the caves." As her grandmother spoke, Emily felt a change in the air. The medallion around her neck suddenly warmed, and the inscriptions in the stone circle began to pulse with their own light. It was as if something inside her was responding to that ancient energy. It was then that they heard the sound of engines in the distance. The New Era Corporation was moving through the forest. Mrs. Wilson frowned, her hands firmly gripping a small bag of herbs she carried. "They can't find this place," she said urgently. "Emily, I need you to focus. Feel the energy of the medallion. Let it awaken what's dormant in your blood." Closing her eyes, Emily took a deep breath. The warmth of the medallion spread through her body like gentle waves. Gradually, she began to perceive the forest in a different way. She could feel the sap running inside the trees, the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the invisible dance of the wind among the leaves. Suddenly, a clear image appeared in her mind. The cave that the men were looking for. She saw ancient symbols carved into the rocky walls, a stone altar in the center, and on it, something that emitted a greenish light. But there was more. In the vision, the guardian wolf was there, its golden eyes fixed on a specific point on the cave wall. "I'm seeing," Emily whispered, her voice distant. "The cave. There's something there. Something they can't take." A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, making the trees shudder. The stone circle glowed more intensely, and Emily felt a deep connection form between her and the forest. It was as if every leaf, every root, every drop of dew was part of her own being. "Your gift is awakening," said Mrs. Wilson, her voice filled with emotion. "You're a seer, Emily. You can see beyond the veil of time and space. This is a rare gift, even in our family." The sound of engines was closer now. Through her new perception, Emily could sense the presence of the invaders like a dark stain in the forest's energy web. They carried strange equipment, devices that emitted disturbing signals to the surrounding nature. "They have advanced technology," Emily warned, opening her eyes. "They're using something to track the energy of the portals." Mrs. Wilson nodded gravely. "The New Era Corporation has studied our traditions for decades. They know more than they should, but they don't truly understand the power they're trying to control." A familiar howl cut through the air, closer this time. Through her new expanded consciousness, Emily could feel the presence of the guardian wolf, its ancient and powerful energy moving through the forest like an electric current. "He's calling us," Emily said, her body trembling with the intensity of the sensations invading her. "We need to go to the cave. There's something I need to see, something that only I can find." At the improvised headquarters of the New Era Corporation, set up in an old farm on the outskirts of Green Mountain, Marcus Caldwell carefully observed the readings from the tracking equipment. The impeccably dressed executive did not show in his expression the anxiety that consumed him inside. Decades of research and millions in investments had led to this moment. "Sir, we detected a new energy signature," reported one of the technicians, adjusting the sensors of a device that looked more like a relic from the future. "It's stronger than all the others, and it's moving." Marcus approached the monitor, his dark eyes fixed on the colorful undulations that represented the mystical energy currents of Green Mountain. A new luminous point pulsed intensely, moving towards the heart of the forest. "The last guardian has finally arrived," he murmured, a calculated smile appearing on his lips. "Exactly as we predicted." On a nearby table, old photos and documents were methodically spread out. Newspaper clippings dated decades ago showed headlines about strange sightings in the region. In one of the black and white photos, a young Mrs. Wilson appeared alongside other women, all wearing medallions similar to the one now with Emily. "Mr. Caldwell," called his assistant Heather Cruz, entering the room with a folder of documents. "The excavation reports have arrived. The team found more symbols on the walls of the main cave. They're identical to those in the Thompson family archives." Marcus took the reports, his fingers sliding over the photographs of the ancient symbols. "Begin the translation immediately. I want to know exactly what those inscriptions say before the girl gets there." Heather hesitated for a moment before continuing. "There's one more thing. The sensors registered unusual activity in the western region of the forest. The Guardian was sighted again." A tense silence filled the room. Marcus walked to a large window, observing the forest that stretched to the horizon. The afternoon sun tinged the treetops with golden hues, creating a landscape that might seem peaceful to less ambitious eyes. "The Guardian is just an instrument," he finally said. "Like the medallion, like the portals, like the forest itself. Everything is part of a larger system, a power that the ancients discovered and learned to channel. And now, that power will be ours." Turning to his team, Marcus began to give precise orders. More equipment was mobilized, security teams repositioned. The New Era Corporation hadn't come this far to allow a girl and her grandmother to interfere with their plans. "Keep surveillance on Mrs. Wilson's house," he instructed. "I want to know their every move, and increase the power of the energy. Blockers, we can't allow them to use the ancient portals to surprise us." As the team moved to carry out his orders, Marcus returned his attention to the monitors. The energy point representing Emily continued to pulse, growing stronger. It was fascinating to observe the awakening of a power that his company had studied for so long. "Heather," he called, without taking his eyes off the screen. "Prepare the special team. When they move towards the cave, I want us to be ready." Outside the farm, more corporate vehicles arrived, bringing sophisticated equipment and armed men. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the terrain. Somewhere in the forest, a solitary howl echoed, as if the Guardian was also preparing for the imminent confrontation. Marcus Caldwell smiled again. His company had waited generations for this moment. The last Guardian had awakened, and with her, the ancient power of Green Mountain was about to be revealed. Everything was happening exactly as the ancient texts had predicted. "It's only a matter of time now," he murmured, observing the gradually darkening sky. "The true power of nature will finally be understood, studied, and controlled." The size. Lights of the equipment blinked incessantly, creating hypnotic patterns in the darkened room. Outside, the forest waited, its shadows guarding secrets that existed long before the arrival of men, secrets that the New Era Corporation was determined to unravel, no matter the cost. The forest seemed different now that Emily could feel its true essence. Each tree pulsed with its own life. Each leaf whispered ancient secrets as she and Mrs. Wilson advanced along almost invisible trails. The medallion on her chest remained warm, guiding them through the dense vegetation like a mystical compass. "The portals are blocked," murmured Mrs. Wilson, her hands caressing the trunk of a centuries-old tree. "The corporation is using technology to interfere with the ancient energy. We'll have to take the longer path to the cave." Emily nodded, focusing on the new sensations flowing through her body. Her visions now came in flashes, showing fragments of the past and possibilities of the future. She saw her great-grandmother walking these same trails, the same medallion around her neck. She saw other guardians before her, each carrying their own gift, protecting the secrets of Green Mountain. "There," Emily suddenly pointed, veering onto an almost imperceptible trail to the right. "I can see there's a safe passage this way." Mrs. Wilson smiled, proud. "Your gift is getting stronger by the minute. Your great-grandmother also had this ability to see safe paths through the forest." As they advanced, Emily began to notice small symbols carved into the oldest trees. They were subtle marks that ordinary eyes would never perceive, forming a kind of map for those who knew how to read them. "Our family has protected this forest for generations," explained Mrs. Wilson, her fingers tracing one of the symbols. "Each mark tells a story, guards a secret. They're like pages of a living book written in nature itself. A distant sound of engines made them stop. Through her expanded perception, Emily could sense the New Era Corporation teams moving through the forest, their equipment creating distortions in the web of natural energy that she could now perceive. "They're everywhere," she whispered, closing her eyes to better visualize the movements of the invaders. "They're using some kind of technology that interferes with the forest's energy. It's like static on a radio." Mrs. Wilson took out a small vial containing a dark green liquid from her herb bag. "This will help us go unnoticed. Herbs have their own secrets, their own magic." The liquid had a strong, bitter taste, but as soon as she swallowed it, Emily felt a subtle change. It was as if her presence had become more diffuse, harder to detect. The leaves and shadows seemed to move naturally to conceal them. They continued advancing, now with even more caution. The sun was beginning to set, and the forest was gaining different shades of green and gold. The sounds of nature seemed more intense. The birdsong, the rustling of leaves, the distant murmur of a stream. Everything was part of an ancient symphony that Emily was just beginning to understand. A new vision hit her with full force, making her stagger. She saw the cave again, but now with more details. The stone altar in the center wasn't just an altar. It was some kind of mechanism, part of something bigger. The inscriptions on the walls told a story, a warning. "What they're looking for," Emily said, her voice trembling as the vision dissipated. "It's not just an artifact, it's a key to something much older and more powerful." Mrs. Wilson stopped, her face showing concern. "The ancient texts speak of a power capable of awakening the very essence of nature. In the right hands, it could bring balance and healing. In the wrong hands, a branch snapped near them, interrupting the explanation. The two froze, their hearts beating rapidly. Through the trees, they could see the glow of flashlights approaching. Male voices echoed, getting closer and closer. It was then that they felt it, a strong and ancient presence moving in the shadows. The guardian wolf was nearby, watching, protecting. Its power emanated like invisible waves through the forest, and Emily could feel an increasingly strong connection with the mystical creature. "He's showing us another way," Emily whispered, her medallion pulsing in sync with the guardian's energy. "We need to head east. There's a secret passage behind that rock formation." The voices and flashlights passed by them without noticing, protected by the magic of the herbs and the forest shadows. When the danger had passed, they continued their journey, now following the Guardian's guidance. Time was running out, and they needed to reach the cave before the New Era Corporation found what they were looking for. At the New Era Corporation base, Marcus Caldwell examined the latest translations of the symbols found in the cave. His normally impassive face showed signs of agitation as he compared the notes with ancient texts that his company had collected over decades. "This changes everything," he murmured, running his fingers over a particular set of symbols. "It's not just an artifact. It's a nexus, a point of connection with something much greater." Heather Cruz hurriedly entered the room, carrying new reports. "Sir, the latest analyses confirm it. The energy patterns are intensifying throughout the region. It's as if the forest itself was awakening." Marcus stood up, walking to the holographic map that showed the entire Green Mountain area. Points of light pulsed in different locations, forming a pattern that resembled a complex web of energy. "For generations, we thought we were looking for an object of power," he explained, his eyes fixed on the dancing lights. "But it's much more than that. The ancients didn't create an artifact. They found a way to connect with the very life force of the planet." On the monitors around, graphs and measurements showed increasingly intense changes in the forest's energy patterns. It was as if every tree, every leaf, every drop of dew was charged with an ancient energy that was beginning to awaken. "The girl," said Heather, observing a particularly bright point moving across the map. "She's different from the other guardians, isn't she? Her power." "She's a catalyst," interrupted Marcus, a gleam of understanding in his eyes. "The ancient prophecies spoke of this, a guardian who would not only protect the secret, but would be able to activate it, a seer capable of seeing beyond the veil of time." On a nearby screen, security camera images showed Emily and Mrs. Wilson moving through the forest. It was impressive how they seemed to blend into the shadows, almost invisible except to the corporation's most advanced sensors. All these years, Marcus continued, his voice laden with contained emotion, we studied the patterns, collected data, developed technology to understand and control this energy, but we never imagined that the true power wasn't in an object, but in the living connection with nature itself. Heather frowned, concerned. But if that's the case, if the power is as vast as we suspect, wouldn't trying to control it be too dangerous? Marcus smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Every great scientific advancement brings its risks, my dear Heather. Think of the possibilities, unlimited energy, control over the very elements of nature. We could revolutionize the world. A sudden alarm cut through the air, making everyone in the room jump. On the monitors, new energy points began to appear like stars appearing in a night sky. The ancient portals, exclaimed one of the technicians. They're activating on their own. Our blockers are no longer working. Marcus ran to the equipment, his fingers dancing over the controls. It's her presence. The closer she gets to the cave, the stronger the connection becomes. The forest is responding to her power. Through the windows, they could see the sky changing. Dark clouds were forming rapidly, and an unnatural wind began to blow, making the trees sway in an unnatural way. Send all available teams, Marcus ordered, his voice firm despite the evident tension. We need to reach the cave before them and increase the power of the containment equipment. We can't allow this power to awaken completely before we can control it. As the base bustled with the movement of teams, Marcus turned his attention to an ancient scroll carefully preserved in a glass box. On it, an illustration showed a woman with a medallion, her arms raised as energy flowed around her. By her side, a majestic wolf stood guard. So much power, he murmured, so much potential, and all in the hands of a girl who barely understands what's happening. We can't allow this opportunity to escape. The wind outside increased and the equipment began to register increasingly intense readings. The battle for control of Green Mountain's ancient power was about to reach its climax, and no one could predict the consequences that would follow. The entrance to the cave revealed itself before them like a portal to another world. Ancient inscriptions covered the rocky walls, glowing softly with their own light that seemed to pulse in sync with Emily's medallion. The wind that blew through the forest now carried a different sound, like an ancient chant that only they could hear. "It's here," whispered Emily, her entire body vibrating with the energy of the place. "Exactly as in my visions." Mrs. Wilson touched one of the inscriptions on the wall, her fingers tracing the symbols with reverence. "These marks tell the story of our people, Emily, of how the first guardians discovered the power that slept beneath this land and how they swore to protect it." As they advanced into the interior of the cave, Emily felt her gift intensify. The visions now came in continuous waves, showing fragments of the past that mingled with the present. She saw her ancestors performing ancient rituals in this very location, saw the guardian wolf through the ages, always present, always vigilant. The cave opened into an impressive circular chamber, its high ceiling lost in darkness. In the center, exactly as in her visions, was the stone altar. But now Emily could clearly see that it wasn't a simple altar. It was part of a complex mechanism, with lines of energy running across the floor in intricate patterns. "The symbols," Emily murmured, approaching the walls. "I can read them. It's as if they were speaking directly to my mind." Mrs. Wilson observed her granddaughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Your gift is stronger than we imagined. You not only see through time, but you can understand the very language of nature." The inscriptions revealed an ancient story, older than humanity itself. They spoke of a time when the earth was in perfect balance, when the elements of nature danced in harmony. The first guardians, humans especially sensitive to this energy, discovered how to connect with this primordial power. "It's not an artifact that they built," said Emily, her eyes wide with understanding. "It's a nexus, a point of connection with the very life force of the planet. The altar, the symbols, all of this is part of a larger system." A distant sound of engines echoed through the cave, making them both start. The New Era Corporation was approaching. Through her expanded perception, Emily could feel their equipment disturbing the delicate energy balance of the place. "They don't understand," Emily continued, her hands touching the central altar. "This power can't be controlled or contained. It's like trying to capture the wind itself or imprison the sunlight. It's a living force that flows through everything." The medallion on her chest began to glow more intensely, responding to the ancient energy of the place. The lines on the cave floor came to life, pulsing with a greenish light that spread like luminous veins. "The Guardian is coming," announced Mrs. Wilson, her eyes fixed on the cave entrance. "He senses that the moment is near." Emily closed her eyes, letting her gift flow freely. The visions now showed not only the past, but possibilities of the future. She saw the New Era Corporation's technology trying to contain and control the ancient energy, saw the chaos this could cause, the imbalance that threatened not just Green Mountain, but the entire planet. "There's something I need to do," she said, her voice carrying a certainty she didn't know she possessed. Something that only a seer can accomplish. The cave walls seemed to vibrate with growing energy. The air became denser, charged with static electricity. Outside, the wind increased, and clouds gathered over Green Mountain in a pattern that defied nature. "The power is awakening," Mrs. Wilson murmured, observing the transformations around them. "And you, my dear, are the key to all of this." Powerful howl echoed through the cave, making the very air tremble. The guardian wolf had arrived, its majestic presence filling the space with an ancient and wild energy. Its golden eyes met Emily's, and in that moment a deep understanding passed between them. The moment of truth had come. The forces of the New Era Corporation were approaching rapidly, but Emily finally understood her role in this ancestral story. The power that ran in her veins wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility, a legacy that spanned generations. Marcus Caldwell emerged from the forest like a shadow among the trees, his determined steps echoing through the cave entrance. Behind him, a team of men carried sophisticated equipment, their lights cutting through the twilight of the sacred place. Heather Cruz followed closely, her normally controlled face betraying signs of apprehension. "Fascinating," Marcus murmured, his eyes scanning the luminous inscriptions on the walls. "Years of research, and finally we're here, witnessing the awakening." Emily and Mrs. Wilson positioned themselves near the central altar, the guardian wolf by their side, its imposing form casting an elongated shadow on the cave floor. The medallion on Emily's neck pulsed ever stronger, in tune with the energy lines that now shone throughout the location. "You don't understand what you're doing," Emily said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone. "This power wasn't meant to be controlled or exploited. It's part of a greater balance." Marcus smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "On the contrary, my dear Emily, we understand perfectly. Years studying your family, the ancient texts, the energy patterns. We know exactly what this place represents." The technicians began to position their equipment at strategic points in the cave. Devices started to emit energy pulses that interfered with the natural glow of the inscriptions, trying to contain and direct the power emanating from the location. "Humanity has always evolved through control of the forces of nature," Marcus continued, slowly advancing. "Fire, electricity, atomic energy. Each discovery has taken us further. Imagine what we could achieve with this power." The guardian wolf growled, a deep sound that made the very walls of the cave vibrate. The energy of the place began to pulse more intensely, responding to the invasive presence of the corporation's technology. Through her gift, Emily could see the consequences of Marcus's actions unfolding in possible futures. She saw the energy being corrupted, the natural balance being destroyed, waves of chaos spreading far beyond Green Mountain. "You are playing with forces you can't understand," warned Mrs. Wilson, her hands firmly holding her bag of herbs. "This power isn't a tool to be used. It's the very essence of life." Heather took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the equipment monitors. "Sir, the readings are becoming unstable. The energy, it's reacting unpredictably." The air in the cave was becoming increasingly dense, charged with static electricity. The energy lines on the floor pulsed more rapidly, and the symbols on the walls glowed with an almost painful intensity. "Activate the stabilizers," Marcus ordered, his composure beginning to waver in the face of the growing power manifesting around him. "We need to contain this energy before—" His words were interrupted by a tremor that shook the entire cave. The roots that intertwined across the ceiling began to move as if they were alive, responding to an ancestral call. Emily felt the power flowing through her like an electric current. The medallion on her chest shone like a star, and her visions now came in a continuous cascade of images and sensations. Past, present, and future mingled in her mind, showing her the true purpose of this sacred place. "This is a nexus," she said, her voice echoing with supernatural force, "a point of balance between the natural world and the world of men. It wasn't created to give power to anyone. It was created to maintain harmony." The guardian wolf threw its head back, letting out a howl that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 years. The cave's energy responded, the lines on the floor, glowing even more intensely, forming complex patterns that expanded in all directions. The New Era Corporation's equipment began to fail, its sensors overloaded by the amount of energy now flowing freely through the environment. Some began to spark, others simply shut down. "No," shouted Marcus, seeing his years of planning crumbling before his eyes. "Activate the backup generators, we can't lose control now." But it was too late. The ancient power of Green Mountain had fully awakened, and through Emily, it was about to show its true nature. The battle for the future of the sacred forest had begun, and nothing would be the same again. The energy in the cave reached impossible levels to control. The power lines running across the floor glowed like rivers of emerald light, and the ancient symbols on the walls pulsed in a hypnotic dance. Emily stood at the center of it all, the medallion on her chest radiating a light so intense that one could barely look directly at it. "It's too late to try to contain this," she said, her voice carrying echoes of past generations. "The power is awakening, and through it, the forest itself is manifesting." Marcus watched in a mixture of fascination and horror as his most sophisticated equipment collapsed one after another. Sparks flew from the machines, and the sensors emitted increasingly chaotic readings before shutting down completely. "We can't lose everything now," he shouted, his composure finally breaking. "Heather, activate the Omega Protocol. We'll drain all the energy from this place if necessary." Heather hesitated, her eyes wide at the scene unfolding. "But sir, the calculations indicate that this could cause a total system collapse. The cave itself could—" Her words were interrupted when the roots running across the cave ceiling began to move with a life of their own, descending like living serpents. The guardian wolf, its golden eyes shining with an ancestral light, let out a howl that made the very air vibrate. Mrs. Wilson began to chant in an ancient language, her hands spreading herbs in a circle around Emily. The air filled with mystical aromas that seemed to awaken the power of the place even more. Through her expanded gift, Emily could see beyond the present moment. She saw the energy lines running beneath the earth, connecting Green Mountain to other sacred places around the world. She saw how each tree, each leaf, each living being was part of a complex web of life and energy. "This power doesn't exist to be used or controlled," she declared, her words carrying a force that made everyone in the cave stop. "It exists to maintain balance, to connect all living beings in an eternal dance of harmony." The visions continued to flow through her, showing her the true nature of her gift. It wasn't just the ability to see through time, it was the power to understand the deep connections that linked all things. Marcus, desperate, pulled out a small black device from his pocket. "If we can't control this energy, then no one else will. This electromagnetic pulse will—" Before he could complete his threat, the guardian wolf moved. With a graceful leap, it snatched the device from Marcus's hand, destroying it with its powerful jaws. At that moment, something extraordinary began to happen. The power flowing through Emily expanded in concentric waves, touching each person present in the cave. It was as if a veil had been removed from their eyes, allowing everyone to see, if only briefly, the true nature of the force that inhabited this place. Heather was the first to take a step back, dropping her equipment. It's incredible," she murmured, tears streaming down her face. We can see." One by one, the technicians and security guards of the New Era Corporation began to retreat, abandoning their posts. The energy pulsing through the cave wasn't threatening or dangerous. It was life in its purest form, the same force that made flowers bloom and stars shine. "No," shouted Marcus, seeing his control slip through his fingers. "You don't understand the potential, the power we're losing." But even as he spoke, the cave's energy enveloped him, forcing him to see the truth. That was beyond his ambition. Through Emily's amplified power, each person present could feel their connection to nature, understand their place in the great web of life. The guardian wolf approached Emily, its golden eyes fixed on hers. Through this connection, she finally understood the ultimate purpose of her gift. It wasn't just to protect the ancient power, it was to help others understand its true nature. "This is the true gift of the Guardians," said Mrs. Wilson, her voice laden with emotion. "It's not to keep a secret, but to help people see the truth that has always been before their eyes." The energy continued to flow, but now in a gentler, more harmonious rhythm. The power lines on the cave floor formed increasingly complex patterns, connecting all those present in a dance of light and understanding. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. Dawn came to Green Mountain, bringing a different light, more vibrant and alive than anyone had ever seen. The energy that had awakened in the sacred cave now flowed freely through the forest, restoring the natural balance that had been disturbed. Emily was sitting on the porch of her grandmother's house, observing the sunrise with new eyes. The medallion on her chest still glowed softly, a constant reminder of the transformation that had occurred. Beside her, Mrs. Wilson prepared her morning tea with fresh herbs from the garden. "The forest is singing," Emily said, closing her eyes to better feel the currents of energy she could now clearly perceive. "It's like an ancient symphony that was always there, but that I can only now fully hear." Heather Cruz, who had remained in town after the events in the cave, approached the house. Her sophisticated equipment had been replaced by a simple notebook, and her face showed a serenity she didn't possess before. "The last members of the corporation are leaving town," she informed, accepting a cup of tea offered by Mrs. Wilson. Marcus, well, he's still trying to process everything that happened. The experience in the cave affected him deeply. The guardian wolf rested in the shade of a nearby tree, its golden eyes attentive to every movement. It was no longer a mysterious or threatening presence, but a living reminder of the deep connection between all beings. "Some people from the corporation decided to stay," Heather continued, her eyes shining with a new purpose. "We want to learn, understand, not to control or exploit, but to protect and preserve." Mrs. Wilson smiled, a smile full of ancient wisdom. The forest always knew this day would come. That's why it waited so long, guarding its secrets until the right moment arose. Her grandmother's words made Emily reflect on everything that had happened. Her gift of clairvoyance had expanded and matured. Now she could see not just fragments of the past and future, but understand the intricate connections that linked all moments of time. "The ancient portals are active again," she said, feeling the currents of energy flowing through them. "But now they serve not to hide, but to teach, to show those who are ready the true nature of life." Heather made some notes in her notebook. "Several universities and research centers have already shown interest in studying the region. But this time it will be different. Under the guidance of the Guardians, we can learn without disturbing the natural balance." The wind blew gently through the garden, carrying the aroma of herbs and flowers. Each plant seemed more vibrant, more alive. The energy that had awakened in the cave continued to spread, touching everything and everyone in subtle but profound ways. "The world is changing," observed Mrs. Wilson, her hands caressing an ancient medicinal herb. "And this time, the change comes from the awakening of consciousness, not from force or technology." Emily stood up, walking to the garden. She could feel life pulsing in every plant, every insect, every drop of dew. Her gift now allowed her to see the beauty and complexity of the web of life with a clarity she never imagined possible. "There's still much work to be done," she said, turning to Heather and her grandmother. "Many people to teach, many ancient secrets to understand. But now we know that true power isn't in control, but in harmony. The guardian wolf approached, gently resting its head on Emily's hand. Through this contact, she could feel the ancient wisdom the creature carried, the history of countless guardians who had protected this place through the centuries. Green Mountain has always been more than just a forest, concluded Mrs. Wilson, her eyes shining with tears of joy. It's a living reminder of our connection to nature, a portal to a deeper understanding of life. The sun rose in the sky, bathing the forest with its golden light. A new era had begun, not just for Green Mountain, but for all who were ready to see and understand the true nature of the power that had always been there, waiting to be rediscovered. 3 months had passed since the events in the sacred cave and Green Mountain had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The small town, once forgotten on the map, now attracted visitors from all corners of the country. Not ordinary tourists, but people who somehow felt the call of the forest. Emily observed the changes from the window of the new Center for Natural Studies, established in the former New Era Corporation warehouse. The space, once filled with monitoring equipment, now housed a specialized library of ancestral knowledge and a carefully cultivated medicinal herb garden under Mrs. Wilson's supervision. "It's amazing how everything has changed," commented Heather, who had become one of the center's main researchers. Her old executive suit had been replaced by more practical clothes, and her hands now bore the soft marks of the garden soil. "Every day we learn something new about the connection between modern science and ancient wisdom." The center had become a meeting point between two worlds. Scientists worked side by side with traditional healers, studying the properties of local plants and the energy patterns that flowed through the forest. Some former members of the New Era Corporation, touched by the experience in the cave, had decided to dedicate their technical knowledge to preserving and understanding, not controlling. "The gift is manifesting in other people," said Emily, observing a group of young people participating in an environmental awareness class in the garden. "Not in the same way as in our family, but everyone seems more sensitive to the forest's energy now." It was true. Since the awakening of the ancient power, many people had begun to develop a special sensitivity towards nature. Some could sense the approach of rain days in advance. Others developed an extraordinary talent for healing through plants. It was as if the awakening had opened a portal not just in the cave, but in the collective consciousness. Mrs. Wilson entered the room, carrying a basket of freshly picked herbs. Her face radiated deep satisfaction at seeing her knowledge, previously restricted to the family, being shared and expanded in ways she never imagined possible. "The Council of Elders has reached a decision," she announced, placing the basket on a rustic wooden table. "They're going to allow us to establish more study centers in other areas of the forest, but with one condition. Each center must have a trained guardian to oversee the activities." Emily smiled, understanding the implications. Her gift of clairvoyance had shown that other women with the potential to become guardians existed, scattered throughout the country. Some had already arrived in Green Mountain, drawn by dreams and visions they didn't fully understand. "And Marcus?" asked Heather, her voice carrying a note of concern. The former director of the New Era Corporation had spent the last few weeks in retreat, staying in a small cabin on the outskirts of the forest. "He's changing," Emily replied, her visions showing her fragments of the man's transformation process. The experience in the cave shook him deeply. He's learning to see the world from a new perspective. The guardian wolf, which now moved freely through the town without causing fear, appeared at the center's door. Its presence was a constant reminder of the ancient alliance between humans and nature, an alliance that was being renewed and strengthened. "I've received letters from universities all over the world," Heather commented, showing a folder full of correspondence. "They want to establish partnerships, send researchers. But the most interesting are the reports coming in. Other forests around the world seem to be awakening too." Emily closed her eyes, letting her gift flow. She saw other ancient forests, other guardians, other points of power waiting to be rediscovered. The energy that had awakened in Green Mountain was just the beginning of something much larger. "The knowledge of the ancients is returning," said Mrs. Wilson, beginning to sort the herbs from her basket. Not as a relic of the past, but as a bridge to the future. A future where science and ancestral wisdom walk together. In the garden, the classes continued. Children learned about the plant cycle, while older ladies shared knowledge about medicinal herbs. The forest's energy flowed through everything and everyone, no longer as a secret to be guarded, but as a gift to be shared and understood. Our family protected these secrets for generations, Emily reflected, touching the medallion she still wore. But perhaps the true purpose was always this: to wait for the right moment to share them with the world. Night was falling over Green Mountain, and the Center for Natural Studies was illuminated only by the soft light of handcrafted lanterns. Emily remained in her room, analyzing an ancient map that Heather had discovered in the New Era Corporation archives. The scroll showed locations of other possible power points around the world, marked with symbols similar to those found in the sacred cave. Each point corresponds to an ancient forest, she explained to the small group gathered in her room. And in each of them there's a potential guardian waiting to awaken. Among those present was Marcus, his transformation evident not only in his simpler clothes, but mainly in his gaze. Unbridled ambition had given way to a deeper and more respectful curiosity. He had become a valuable ally, using his knowledge of technology to create ways to study the forest's energy without interfering with its natural flow. The corporation's satellites detected changes at several of these points, he said, indicating specific areas on the map. It's as if the awakening here had initiated a chain reaction. Mrs. Wilson, who was preparing one of her special teas in a corner of the room, nodded wisely. The Earth is alive, and all its parts are connected. What happens in one place affects all others. Heather was taking detailed notes, her scientific mind now working in harmony with the ancestral wisdom they had discovered. We've already identified 5 women in different countries who show signs of being potential guardians. They all report similar dreams, visions of the forest. The guardian wolf lying near the window suddenly raised its head. Through her connection with it, Emily felt a change in the forest's energy. Something new was coming, something that would require all the wisdom and strength they had gained. The world is changing rapidly, she said, her visions showing her fragments of the approaching future. And with these changes will come new challenges. Not everyone is ready to accept a new way of seeing nature. Marcus stood up, walking to the map. The New Era Corporation wasn't the only organization interested in this power. Others will come, perhaps with less evident intentions, but equally dangerous. That's why we need to be prepared, Mrs. Wilson replied, distributing cups of tea. And not just to protect, but to teach. True power lies in shared knowledge, not in guarded secrets. Emily observed the group gathered in her room, a former corporate executive, a transformed scientist, her guardian grandmother, and herself, an architect who had discovered her true purpose. Each represented a different part of the bridge they were building between the old and the new. Our responsibility now is greater than ever, she continued, her medallion glowing softly. We are no longer just guardians of a secret. We are teachers, guides to a new way of living in harmony with nature. Heather looked up from her notes. The first apprentices arrive next week, women from different parts of the world, each bringing their own wisdom and experience. And each of them will take this knowledge back to their communities, Marcus added, like a seed that spreads on the wind. The guardian wolf stood up, walking to Emily. Through it, she could feel the approval of the forest itself. The cycle was completing. What was once guarded by few would now be shared with many, but in a way that preserved its sacred character. The future isn't written, said Emily, her visions showing multiple possible paths. But for the first time, I feel we're on the right track. Harmony between humanity and nature isn't just a distant dream. It's a real possibility. As the group continued their discussion, planning the next steps of their journey, the forest outside seemed to pulse with renewed life. The ancient energy that had awakened continued to flow, touching more and more lives, transforming more and more hearts. Green Mountain had become more than just a point on the map. It was now a beacon of hope, a living example of how the old and the new could coexist in harmony. And Emily, along with her companions, was ready to guide others along the same path of discovery and transformation that she had traveled. The morning arrived, bringing a different energy to Green Mountain. The Center for Natural Studies buzzed with activity as final preparations were made to receive the first apprentices. Emily walked through the corridors, her medallion pulsing softly, in tune with the excitement in the air. "They're coming," she announced, her visions showing her images of women traveling from different parts of the world, each carrying their own story, their own connection to nature. Mrs. Wilson supervised the preparation of the initiation garden, a space specially designed to awaken the sensitivity of the new guardians. Rare herbs and mystical flowers had been planted in specific patterns, creating an environment where energy flowed more intensely. "Each plant has its purpose," she explained to a group of local students helping with the preparations. "Some awaken in a vision, others strengthen the connection with the elements. Together they form a symphony that helps awaken dormant gifts." Heather, who had transformed one of the rooms into an energy studies laboratory, was finalizing the installation of sensitive equipment that would allow them to document the manifestations of ancient power without interfering with its natural flow. "It's fascinating," she commented, adjusting a specially developed sensor. "Each person who comes to Green Mountain presents a unique pattern of resonance with the forest's energy. It's as if each human being had their own energy signature." Marcus, who now spent more time at the center than in his old retreat cabin, had created a mapping system that combined modern technology with ancestral knowledge. On large screens, points of light indicated the location of other potential guardians around the world. "The awakening is spreading faster than we imagined," he observed, showing Emily how new points appeared each day. "It's as if the earth itself was calling its protectors." The guardian wolf, now a constant presence at the center, moved between the preparations with attentive grace. Through it, Emily could feel the forest's approval for the new directions they were taking. "Each of the apprentices who is arriving has a specific purpose," said Emily, her visions revealing more details about the future guardians. "Anna from the Amazon has a natural gift for communicating with plants. Sarah from the Rockies can sense the movements of the earth. Yuki from Japan has a deep connection with water." Mrs. Wilson smiled, recognizing the ancient patterns manifesting in new forms. "The elements always seek balance. Each guardian represents a part of that whole." In the garden, a group of local children participated in a class about the importance of bees and other pollinators. It was part of the center's new approach. Sacred knowledge would no longer be restricted to a chosen few, but would be shared in appropriate ways with all generations. "The world is changing," reflected Heather, observing the children. "And, this time, the change comes from a deeper understanding, not from fear or greed." Emily walked to a large window that offered a panoramic view of the forest. Through her expanded gift, she could see the currents of energy flowing through the earth, connecting Green Mountain to other sacred points around the planet. "Each place has its own music," she said, her words carrying the weight of ancestral understanding, its own way of expressing life. "Our task is to help people hear that music again." The afternoon sun cast golden shadows through the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the aroma of herbs from the garden. At the center, preparations continued, each detail being carefully planned to receive those who had answered the earth's call. "The knowledge we guarded for so long," said Mrs. Wilson, joining her granddaughter at the window, "was like a seed waiting for the right season to sprout. Now is the time for growth." As they observed the forest, Emily felt a wave of visions flowing through her. She saw the future guardians in their own territories, each awakening and protecting the power points of their regions. She saw communities transforming, people rediscovering their connection with nature, a new balance being established. "The path won't be easy," she murmured, aware of the challenges that would come. "But for the first time in a long time, we're not alone on this journey." The day dawned differently in Green Mountain. The sky displayed colors that seemed more vivid, more intense, as if nature itself was celebrating the arrival of the new guardians. One by one, they arrived at the Center for Natural Studies, each bringing with them the unique energy of their native lands. Anna from the Amazon was the first to arrive. Her dark eyes shone with recognition when she saw the herbs in the initiation garden. "Some of these plants also grow in my forest," she said, her hands gently touching the leaves. "They sing the same song, even so far from home." Sarah from the Rockies brought crystals and sacred stones from her mountains. As she stepped onto the soil of Green Mountain, her eyes filled with tears. The earth here, it pulses in a familiar way, as if all the mountains in the world shared the same heart. Yuki arrived from Japan, carrying only a small bag and a vial of water from a sacred spring in her homeland. Her movements were as fluid as a stream, and her presence seemed to bring a special calm to the environment. Emily observed each arrival with a mixture of emotion and responsibility. Through her gift, she could see the paths that had brought each of them here and the destinies that awaited them. "Each of you has been chosen," she said, gathering the apprentices in the initiation garden. "Not by us, but by the earth itself. Your gifts are unique, but they are part of a greater whole." Mrs. Wilson conducted a welcome ritual, burning sacred herbs while chanting in an ancient language. The air filled with mystical aromas, and even Heather, with her scientific background, could feel the special energy that was forming. "Science is beginning to understand what the ancients always knew," Heather explained to the apprentices, showing the data on her equipment. "There is a network of living energy that connects all beings, all sacred places on the planet." Marcus, who observed everything with a new look of reverence, noticed how the energy patterns of the place intensified with the presence of the new guardians. It's as if each one brought a part of the code, a unique frequency that completes the harmony of the whole. The guardian wolf circled among the newcomers, its golden eyes studying each of them. To everyone's surprise, each apprentice seemed to have a different reaction to its presence. Anna could see colors of energy around it. Sarah felt vibrations in the earth under her feet, and Yuki perceived energy patterns that resembled waves on a lake. "This is just the beginning," said Emily, her medallion glowing in response to the growing energy. "Each of you will return to your homeland as a bridge between the old and the new, between ancestral wisdom and the needs of the modern world." As the apprentices familiarized themselves with the place and with each other, Mrs. Wilson prepared a special tea, a unique blend of herbs that would help awaken their natural sensitivities. "The knowledge we will share here," she explained, serving the tea in handmade ceramic cups, "is not just about power or special abilities. It's about understanding our true nature, our connection to all life." The afternoon sun cast golden rays through the trees, creating patterns of light that seemed to dance on the garden floor. The new guardians gathered in a circle, each holding their cup of tea, as Emily began to share the story of Green Mountain, of the awakening of ancient power, and of the transformation that had changed not just the place, but everyone who came into contact with its energy. "What happened here was just a seed," she said, her words carrying the weight of the vision she had of the future. "Through you, this seed will spread, creating new gardens of knowledge and transformation in different parts of the world." Heather showed the apprentices the map they had created, where points of light indicated other sacred locations around the planet. "Each of these points has its own guardian waiting to awaken. You will be the first of a new generation of protectors." As the afternoon progressed, a special energy hung over Green Mountain. It was as if the very air vibrated with possibilities, with promises of a future where humanity and nature would once again dance in harmony.